Something is deeply wrong with this little girl. Every morning, she walks into class with the same tired eyes and the same lonely expression, clutching a small, poorly wrapped hamburger. Her teacher watches her closely, sensing that something is off, but no one imagines the horrifying truth behind her silence. One day, she finally breaks down, holding her stomach in unbearable pain. But when the teacher takes a closer look, she sees something moving inside the child's stomach, and in that moment, she knows this is far more than just a simple illness. Secrets buried for years are about to surface, revealing a shocking reality that no one could have ever imagined. Who is this girl? What happened to her parents? And what horrifying secret has been hiding right in front of everyone's eyes? Before the mystery unfolds, make sure to subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments. Where in the world are you watching from? The sound of the school bell echoed through the quiet hallways of Westwood Elementary. Outside, the sky was painted in hues of pale orange and gray, signaling the arrival of an overcast morning. Elizabeth Carter, a dedicated teacher of over 20 years, adjusted the stack of lesson plans on her desk and took a deep breath. Something felt different that day, though she couldn't quite place it. Maybe it was the strange letter she had received that morning, left anonymously on her desk before she even arrived. A simple piece of folded paper with jagged edges, as if it had been torn in haste, carrying an ominous message written in childlike handwriting. You need to look beyond what you see. A child needs you. The words sent an uneasy chill through her spine. She glanced around the empty classroom, the faint scent of chalk dust lingering in the air. The door creaked open, and a few children started to trickle in, their laughter filling the room. Among them was Lily Thompson. The 11-year-old girl was unusually quiet, her small frame wrapped in an oversized hoodie, her blonde hair slightly disheveled. But what caught Elizabeth's attention wasn't just her withdrawn nature. It was the fact that, once again, Lily carried a tightly wrapped hamburger in her hands. "Lily, good morning," Elizabeth greeted warmly, trying to mask the concern in her voice. The girl looked up briefly, offering a small, almost forced smile. "Good morning, Miss Carter." Elizabeth watched as Lily carefully unwrapped her food, her movements almost ritualistic. The bread was slightly stale, the patty dry. It looked like it had been reheated multiple times, yet Lily ate as if it were the only thing keeping her going. "Lily, sweetheart, didn't you bring anything else today?" Elizabeth asked gently. The girl hesitated, glancing down at her meal. "I like hamburgers," she mumbled. Elizabeth crouched beside her desk, lowering her voice. "Every day." Lily's fingers clenched around the wrapper, her eyes darting away. "It's what I have." The response was simple, but it cut deep. Elizabeth felt a pang in her chest. Something wasn't right. As the morning progressed, Elizabeth couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Lily's story. When recess arrived, she watched as the girl sat alone by the window, staring out into the distance. Most of the other children were outside, playing games or chatting in small groups, but Lily remained still, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing patterns on the wooden desk. Deciding to follow her instincts, Elizabeth walked over and sat across from her. "Lily, would you like to take a little walk with me?" Lily blinked, her blue eyes studying the teacher carefully before she nodded. The two of them walked slowly through the schoolyard, the cold air biting at their skin. Elizabeth noticed how thin Lily's arms looked beneath the fabric of her oversized sweater. "Lily, if there's ever anything you need to talk about, I want you to know I'm here," Elizabeth said carefully. The girl looked down, kicking at a small pebble on the pavement. "I'm okay," Elizabeth sighed. She had seen many children struggling before, but there was something different about Lily. She wasn't just quiet. She was hiding something. That afternoon, as Elizabeth was leaving for the day, she saw Lily walking alone toward the residential streets. The teacher hesitated before deciding to follow her from a distance. As she walked, she noticed that Lily wasn't heading toward the bustling parts of town. Instead, she turned down an old road, lined with abandoned houses and overgrown yards. Elizabeth's heart clenched when she saw where Lily stopped, a rundown house with boarded-up windows and a rusting mailbox. The girl hesitated before stepping inside. Something was terribly wrong. The next morning, Elizabeth arrived at the school with a plan. She needed to find out more about Lily's home situation. She went straight to the administrative office, hoping to locate any contact information for the girl's parents. But as she flipped through the records, a cold realization dawned on her. There were no recent emergency contacts listed, no medical records, no sign of parental signatures. It was as if Lily didn't exist in the system. A tight knot formed in Elizabeth's stomach. She needed answers. Later that day, as the students filed into the classroom, Elizabeth noticed Lily seemed paler than usual. Her hands trembled slightly as she unwrapped her usual hamburger. "Lily, are you feeling all right?" Elizabeth asked, crouching beside her. The girl hesitated before nodding. "Just tired." Elizabeth pressed her lips together, trying to decide her next move. She couldn't keep ignoring the signs. At lunchtime, Elizabeth waited until Lily had left the classroom and quickly searched through the girl's desk. What she found sent a chill through her. Inside, there were crumpled fast food wrappers, small coins, and a single folded-up piece of paper. Slowly, Elizabeth opened it. It was a list of items. Candle, $2. Blanket, $10. Shoes, $15. Old radio, $5. Each item had a small checkmark next to it, as if it had already been sold. Elizabeth's breath caught in her throat. Lily had been selling items to survive. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. The oversized hoodie, the exhaustion, the secrecy. It all made sense now. She wasn't being taken care of. She was on her own. Elizabeth felt her hands tremble as she carefully folded the paper and placed it back. She needed to approach this delicately. If Lily felt threatened, she might withdraw completely. That afternoon, Elizabeth waited near the school entrance. As expected, Lily walked out alone. Taking a deep breath, Elizabeth stepped forward. "Lily, would you like a ride home?" The girl froze, her small fingers tightening around the straps of her backpack. "No, thank you," she said quickly. "Lily." Elizabeth hesitated before softening her tone. "I just want to make sure you're okay." For the first time, Lily's expression cracked. Her lower lip trembled, and she looked away. "I'm fine," she whispered, but Elizabeth knew better. That night, she couldn't sleep. The image of Lily's lonely figure haunted her thoughts. She needed to do something. The next morning, Elizabeth made a decision. She would go to Lily's house herself. But when she arrived, standing in front of the decrepit structure, she realized she wasn't the only one there. A black car was parked just a few houses down, its windows tinted so dark that she couldn't see inside. A chill ran down her spine. Something about this wasn't just neglect. It was bigger. As Elizabeth hesitated, debating her next move, the front door of the house slowly creaked open. Lily stood in the doorway, her blue eyes wide with a mixture of fear and something else. Something that made Elizabeth's breath catch. "Ms. Carter, you shouldn't be here." And with that, Lily quickly shut the door, leaving Elizabeth standing alone on the empty street, her heart pounding with unanswered questions. Elizabeth stood motionless in front of the rundown house, her pulse hammering in her ears. The words Lily had spoken, "Ms. Carter, you shouldn't be here," echoed in her mind like a warning she couldn't ignore. The way the girl's blue eyes had widened in fear, the way she had quickly shut the door as if trying to protect herself or someone else, sent a wave of unease through Elizabeth's entire being. Something was very wrong. But what? She glanced toward the sleek black car parked a few houses down, its dark windows reflecting nothing but the lifeless surroundings. Instinct told her that whoever was inside had been watching the house long before she arrived. Watching Lily. The crisp autumn air bit at her skin as she exhaled, her breath clouding in front of her. Turning on her heel, she walked away, but she didn't go far. Instead, she positioned herself behind a lamppost a few yards away, pretending to fumble with her phone as she kept a close eye on the house. Minutes passed, and nothing happened. Then, just as she was about to leave, the black car's engine roared to life. It pulled away from the curb in an eerily slow manner, as if its driver was aware of her presence. but not in a hurry to reveal themselves. Elizabeth watched as it disappeared into the distance, a sinking feeling weighing down her chest. That night, sleep refused to come. She tossed and turned, her mind racing with questions. Who was in that car? Why was Lily so afraid? Why wasn't there any record of her parents? The more she thought about it, the more unsettling it became. She had been a teacher for 2 decades, had seen children in heartbreaking situations before. Poverty, neglect, abandonment, but this felt different. This wasn't just a case of a child being left behind. There was something much deeper, something buried beneath layers of silence and fear. The next morning, Elizabeth arrived at the school early, determined to dig deeper. She went straight to the administrative office, hoping to find some sort of documentation that might shed light on Lily's situation. "Good morning, Ms. Carter." The school secretary, Helen Jacobs, greeted her, adjusting her reading glasses. "You're in early today." Elizabeth forced a smile. "Good morning, Helen. I was hoping to take a quick look at Lily Thompson's file. Just a routine check." Helen gave her a curious look before turning to the filing cabinet. "I don't think we have much on her, but let me see." She flipped through the folders, her expression slowly shifting from mild interest to concern. "That's strange," Helen murmured. "There's no file under her name. Are you sure she's enrolled here?" Elizabeth felt a shiver crawl up her spine. "Of course she is. She's in my class." Helen frowned and checked again, pulling out an outdated, dust-covered binder from the back of the drawer. "I have an old file here, but it hasn't been updated in years." She handed the thin folder to Elizabeth, who flipped it open, her stomach twisting at what she saw. There was almost nothing inside. No emergency contacts, no medical history, no signatures from parents or guardians. The only thing that stood out was a single sheet of paper with Lily's name and date of birth, 11 years old. Elizabeth's hands trembled slightly as she closed the folder. "Helen, could there be a mistake? Maybe another file was misplaced." Helen shook her head, her lips pressed into a thin line. "If there were, it would be in the system. But there's nothing. It's like..." She hesitated. "It's like she was never properly registered." The weight of those words settled heavily on Elizabeth's shoulders. Lily had been attending school, sitting in her classroom every day, yet there was no trace of her existence beyond that. "Do you want me to call the district office?" Helen asked, lowering her voice. "Maybe they have something we don't." Elizabeth hesitated. If Lily truly was alone, contacting the authorities could make things worse for her. The girl was already fearful. What if she ran? What if she disappeared completely? "No," she said finally. "Not yet." The school bell rang, signaling the start of the day. Elizabeth returned to her classroom, her mind still reeling. When Lily walked in, she immediately noticed the exhaustion in the girl's posture. Her shoulders sagged, and her usually pale complexion seemed even more washed out. But what alarmed Elizabeth most was the way Lily avoided eye contact, as if she knew her teacher had been searching for answers. "Good morning, Lily," Elizabeth greeted carefully. "Good morning," Lily murmured, barely above a whisper. Elizabeth wanted to ask if she was okay, but she knew pushing too hard might scare the girl away. Instead, she watched as Lily unwrapped her usual hamburger, picking at the edges of the stale bread. As the day progressed, Elizabeth observed her more closely. Lily was distracted, barely paying attention to the lessons. At lunch, instead of going outside with the other children, she sat alone in the classroom, absently flipping through a book. Elizabeth took a deep breath before approaching her. "Lily, sweetheart, would you like to eat lunch with me today?" Lily looked up, surprised, as if the idea of someone wanting to spend time with her was foreign. "Okay." Elizabeth retrieved 2 sandwiches from her lunch bag, handing one to Lily. The girl hesitated before accepting it, her fingers tightening around the wrapper. After a few moments of silence, Elizabeth spoke softly. "Lily, I was thinking, maybe one day I could drive you home, just to make sure you get there safely." Lily stiffened. Her grip on the sandwich faltered slightly, and for a split second, fear flickered across her face. "You don't have to," she said quickly. Elizabeth kept her voice gentle. I know, but I'd like to. Lily shook her head. It's okay. I get home fine. Lily. Elizabeth hesitated, choosing her next words carefully. Is there someone at home waiting for you? Lily's lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to say something, but then she clamped them shut. She dropped her gaze to the table, her fingers tightening around the sandwich. It's just me, she finally admitted, so quietly that Elizabeth barely heard her. A lump formed in Elizabeth's throat. How long? Lily shrugged. A while. Elizabeth's heart ached. She wanted to wrap the girl in her arms, tell her that she wasn't alone, that she would find a way to help, but she also knew she had to be careful. If Lily had been surviving on her own for this long, she had reasons for keeping it a secret. Before she could say anything else, the classroom door creaked open. Both of them turned as a man in a dark suit stepped inside. Ms. Carter. His voice was smooth but firm. May I have a word with you? Elizabeth frowned. Of course. Just a moment. She turned back to Lily, but the girl had gone rigid. Her eyes locked on the man as if she recognized him. Lily, Elizabeth whispered. The girl quickly looked away, her hands clenching into fists beneath the table. Something was very, very wrong. Elizabeth felt a wave of unease wash over her as she studied the man standing at the door. He was tall, well-dressed, his dark suit perfectly pressed, his polished shoes reflecting the classroom lights. His face was unreadable, but there was something in his gaze that sent a cold shiver down her spine. Something calculated, something that told her this wasn't just a casual visit. Lily, however, was the one who concerned her most. The girl had gone completely still, her small hands clenched tightly in her lap. Her normally pale complexion had lost what little color remained. Her blue eyes dark with an emotion Elizabeth couldn't quite decipher. Fear, recognition, or something worse. Elizabeth straightened, keeping her voice even. How can I help you? The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I'm Richard Lawson. I work with Child Welfare Services. I understand you've taken a particular interest in one of your students. Elizabeth's fingers instinctively curled around the edge of her desk. I take an interest in all my students. Of course, he said smoothly, stepping further into the room, his eyes flickering toward Lily, who immediately dropped her gaze. But Lily Thompson, specifically. Elizabeth's chest tightened. Is there a problem? Not at all, he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. We were informed that you've been asking about her family situation. We appreciate your concern, but I assure you, everything is being handled. Handled. The word rang in her ears like an alarm. Elizabeth forced herself to remain calm. That's strange, because as far as I can tell, there's no record of her parents. No emergency contacts. No one coming to pick her up from school. It seems like no one is handling anything. Lawson's expression didn't change, but the room felt heavier. Ms. Carter, he said slowly, as if speaking to a child who didn't understand the rules. These matters are delicate. It's important that we trust the system to do what's best. Elizabeth's jaw tightened. And what exactly is the system doing for her? There was a long pause, and then Lawson let out a small sigh, as if she had disappointed him. Ms. Carter, we appreciate your dedication, but I must ask you to leave this to the proper authorities. Your involvement is unnecessary. Elizabeth's blood turned cold. Unnecessary? She repeated, barely keeping her voice steady. You think a child living alone, selling off her belongings just to survive, is something I should ignore? Lawson's jaw flexed, his patience thinning. This is not your concern. Something inside Elizabeth snapped. She had spent years fighting for children who had no voice, and she wasn't about to back down now. She squared her shoulders, meeting his gaze head-on. Lily is in my class. She is my concern. A flicker of something. Annoyance? Amusement? Crossed Lawson's face, but he quickly masked it. He glanced at Lily one last time, his expression unreadable. I hope you understand, Miss Carter, he said, his voice softer now, but somehow more unsettling. Some children belong to the past. And sometimes the past should stay buried. Elizabeth's heart pounded. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, he turned on his heel and walked out of the room. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving an unsettling silence in his wake. For a long moment, neither Elizabeth nor Lily spoke. Then, very quietly, Lily whispered, "He's not from child welfare." Elizabeth's breath caught. "Lily, who is he?" Lily swallowed hard, her fingers twisting the fabric of her hoodie. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I've seen him before." Elizabeth knelt beside her, lowering her voice. "When?" Lily hesitated, then whispered, "The night my parents left." A sharp chill ran down Elizabeth's spine. Lily's parents hadn't just disappeared. Someone had been there. Someone had watched them go. Elizabeth took a slow, measured breath. "Lily, sweetheart, I need you to tell me everything you remember about that night." Lily's fingers tightened around the hem of her sweater. "It was late," she murmured. "Really late. My mom woke me up and told me to pack a bag. She was scared, but she wouldn't tell me why." Elizabeth nodded, encouraging her to continue. "My dad was on the phone. He kept saying, 'We can't just run forever. She deserves to know.' But my mom told him to stop talking and just get in the car. She told me to hurry, but then the lights from the driveway turned on." Lily's breath hitched. "A black car," she whispered, "just like the one outside my house yesterday. Someone was inside watching. My dad froze when he saw it. He looked at my mom and said, 'It's too late.' And then they left." Elizabeth's heart pounded. "And they never came back?" Lily shook her head. I waited for days. I thought they would come back, but they didn't." A lump formed in Elizabeth's throat. Lily had been abandoned, but not by choice. Something had forced her parents to leave, and whatever it was still watching. Elizabeth exhaled, trying to steady her thoughts. "Lily, listen to me. We're gonna figure this out, okay? You're not alone in this." Lily looked up at her, a flicker of something unreadable in her expression. Hope? Fear? A mix of both? But before she could say anything, the classroom phone rang, breaking the heavy silence. Elizabeth hesitated before answering. "Hello?" A pause. Then a low, unfamiliar voice said, "You need to stop asking questions." Elizabeth's stomach dropped. "Who is this?" Another pause, then a click. The line went dead. Elizabeth slowly lowered the phone, her mind racing. Someone was watching. Someone knew she was getting too close. But the worst part? She had no idea who she could trust. Elizabeth's hand trembled as she slowly set the phone back into its cradle. The voice still echoed in her mind, low, deliberate, a warning cloaked in an eerie calmness. "You need to stop asking questions." It wasn't a request. It was a threat. A quiet, measured threat from someone who had been watching her. Someone who knew she was getting too close to something they wanted buried. She turned her gaze toward Lily, who sat frozen at her desk, staring at Elizabeth with wide, uncertain eyes. She had heard the way Elizabeth's breath had hitched, the way her expression had shifted from confusion to fear in the span of a heartbeat. "Lily?" Elizabeth said carefully, keeping her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "I need you to tell me everything you remember about the night your parents left." Lily hesitated, pulling the sleeves of her hoodie over her hands, a nervous habit Elizabeth had noticed before. "I already told you," she murmured. Elizabeth softened her tone. "I know, sweetheart, but I need you to think harder. The black car, the man you saw, did he ever speak to your parents? Did they say anything about him?" Lily hesitated for a long moment, as if sorting through fragments of memories she had tried to bury. Then slowly she nodded. "I think my dad knew him." Elizabeth's stomach tightened. "How do you know?" Lily's fingers clenched around the hem of her hoodie. "Because when he saw the car, he said, 'It's him.'" A chill ran down Elizabeth's spine. "It's him." That meant whoever had been watching Lily's house the other night, the man in the black car, was the same person her father had feared before they disappeared. Lily, Elizabeth said carefully. When your parents left, did they tell you where they were going? The girl hesitated, her expression clouding with uncertainty. No, she admitted. But before they left, my mom put something in my backpack. She told me not to lose it. Elizabeth leaned forward slightly. Do you still have it? Lily bit her lip before slowly nodding. It's in my house. Elizabeth's heart pounded. It was still there. Lily, she said gently, I know you don't want me to go to your house, but I think we need to get whatever your mom left you. Lily hesitated, conflict flashing across her face. Then, finally, she whispered, Okay. The final bell rang, signaling the end of the school day. Elizabeth gathered her things quickly, her mind already racing through 1,000 possibilities of what they might find. She led Lily out of the school, scanning the parking lot as they walked. The black car wasn't there, but that didn't mean they weren't being watched. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon as they approached Lily's house. The sky painted in streaks of fading orange and purple. The neighborhood was eerily quiet. Elizabeth felt a prickle of unease crawl up her spine, but she forced herself to focus. Lily hesitated at the front door, glancing around before pulling a small key from her pocket. She unlocked the door and stepped inside, motioning for Elizabeth to follow. The air inside was stale, heavy with the scent of dust and something else, something faintly metallic. The house was eerily bare, stripped of the warmth that a home was supposed to have. The furniture was sparse, a few scattered belongings still clinging to remnants of the life that had once filled these walls. Lily moved cautiously toward the small bedroom at the end of the hall, her footsteps hesitant. Elizabeth followed closely, her senses on high alert. Lily crouched beside her bed, reaching beneath it and pulling out a worn, faded backpack. She unzipped it slowly, her small hands trembling slightly. Then, she pulled out a thick, yellowed envelope. Elizabeth's breath caught. May I see it? Lily hesitated for only a moment before nodding and handing it over. Elizabeth carefully turned it over in her hands. There was no name on the outside, no markings. Just an old, weathered envelope sealed tightly. She peeled it open with careful fingers, pulling out a stack of folded papers. As she unfolded them, her heart pounded in her chest. Inside were legal documents, birth certificates, bank statements, a notarized letter. Elizabeth's eyes scanned the papers, her pulse racing. Then she saw it, something that made her entire body go cold. Lily's last name wasn't Thompson. The name on the birth certificate was different. Lillian Grace Whitmore. Elizabeth's breath caught. Whitmore. The name tugged at something in her memory, something distant but familiar. She shuffled through the rest of the papers until she found the letter. Handwritten, the ink slightly smudged as if someone had been crying when they wrote it. Elizabeth's eyes darted to the bottom, searching for a signature. And there it was. Margaret Whitmore. Elizabeth's stomach twisted. She knew that name. Margaret Whitmore had been a high-profile banking executive who had vanished without a trace 6 years ago. Her disappearance had made national headlines. Investigations had been launched. Theories had spread like wildfire, but no one had ever found her. And now Elizabeth was holding a letter from her in her hands. Lily, she whispered, her voice barely steady. Your parents, they weren't just running, were they? Lily looked up at her, her blue eyes wide with confusion. I don't know, she said softly. I just remember my mom saying, one day you'll understand. Elizabeth's mind raced. Margaret Whitmore. She had been a powerhouse in the financial world, rumored to have uncovered something dangerous just before she disappeared. Some had speculated foul play, others had claimed she had run off with stolen money. But the truth had never been discovered. Until now. Elizabeth turned her gaze back to Lily, realization sinking in like a weight in her chest. Lily, she said carefully, I think your parents weren't just running away from something. I think they were hiding from someone. Before Lily could respond, a sharp thud echoed from the front door. Elizabeth's breath hitched. Lily's eyes went wide with terror. Ms. Carter, she whispered, clutching Elizabeth's arm. Someone's here. Elizabeth's mind raced. They had taken too long. Someone had followed them. She quickly shoved the documents back into the backpack and grabbed Lily's hand. "We need to go. Now." She moved swiftly, guiding Lily toward the back door. But as they reached it, another sound echoed through the house. The creak of the front door opening. Someone was inside. Elizabeth's heart pounded as she glanced around. They couldn't go out the back. The lock was rusted shut. They were trapped. Footsteps echoed down the hall. Elizabeth pulled Lily into the small laundry closet, pressing a finger to her lips. The girl's breath was uneven, her small body trembling. Elizabeth wrapped an arm around her, holding her close, trying to steady her own racing heart. The footsteps grew closer. Elizabeth squeezed her eyes shut. Then silence. A long, stretched moment of nothingness. Elizabeth held her breath, listening, waiting. Then, a quiet voice. Calm, cold. "We know you have it." A pause. "You can't hide forever." The sound of the front door shutting sent a jolt through Elizabeth's body. Then silence again. But they weren't gone. She knew it. They were just waiting. Elizabeth took a slow, steady breath before whispering into Lily's ear. "We have to get out of here." Lily swallowed hard, nodding. And as Elizabeth carefully peeked through the crack of the door, one thought burned in her mind. She had just uncovered something that someone was willing to do anything to keep buried. Elizabeth's pulse pounded in her ears as she kept her hand firmly on Lily's shoulder, keeping the girl close to her. Every muscle in her body was tense, her senses heightened to every tiny sound in the house. Whoever had entered just moments ago, whoever had whispered those chilling words, was still nearby. She knew it. Lily's breath was shallow against her sleeve, her small hands clenched tightly into fists. Elizabeth could feel the girl trembling beside her, and it broke her heart. But there was no time for comfort, no moment to reassure her that everything would be okay, because Elizabeth didn't know if it would be. Her mind raced for a plan. The back door was useless. The front door? Too risky. They would have to walk directly into whoever was watching them. The windows? Maybe. She turned her head slightly, scanning the tiny laundry closet they were hiding in. The small vent near the ceiling was too narrow for either of them to fit through, and the only other exit was the door that led back into the hallway, the same hallway where she had heard the voice just moments ago. They were trapped. Elizabeth pressed a finger to her lips, signaling to Lily to stay silent. The girl gave a small, barely perceptible nod. Slowly, Elizabeth reached for her phone in her pocket, her fingers trembling as she unlocked the screen. Her heart sank when she saw it. No signal. Of course. She swallowed hard. Whoever was watching them, whoever was pulling the strings behind all of this, they were careful. They had planned this. Her mind flashed back to the documents in Lily's backpack. The birth certificate, the legal statements, the name Margaret Whitmore. Elizabeth had uncovered something far bigger than she had imagined. She took a slow, steady breath, trying to calm the whirlwind of thoughts in her head. Right now, the priority was getting out of the house safely. She glanced down at Lily, who was staring at her with wide, terrified eyes. Elizabeth reached out, gently squeezing the girl's hand. Then, in the softest whisper she could manage, she murmured, "Stay behind me. When I say run, you run. Don't look back." Lily nodded, her tiny fingers gripping Elizabeth's sleeve. Elizabeth took another breath, placed her hand on the doorknob, and slowly, very slowly, twisted it open. The door creaked softly. She peeked into the hallway. Empty. But she didn't trust it. Every nerve in her body was screaming that someone was still inside. Watching. Waiting. She stepped out cautiously, shielding Lily with her arm as they moved down the hall. The silence was suffocating, thick with the kind of tension that made her skin crawl. The front door was just a few feet away. Elizabeth took a step forward, and then the floor creaked behind her. Her entire body went rigid. Someone was there. Her breath hitched. She turned her head slightly, just enough to see the faint outline of a figure standing in the shadows near the kitchen. She couldn't make out a face, only the silhouette of a tall, unmoving presence. "Lily," Elizabeth whispered, her voice barely audible. On my count. She felt the girl tighten her grip on her arm. 1. The figure shifted slightly. 2. A step forward. 3. Run. Lily bolted toward the door, and Elizabeth followed, heart pounding as she reached for the doorknob. The moment her fingers touched the metal, a voice rang out. You shouldn't have come here. Elizabeth barely had time to process the words before she yanked the door open and shoved Lily through. She turned, just for a split second, catching a glimpse of piercing dark eyes in the dim light, and then she slammed the door shut behind her. They ran. Elizabeth didn't stop, didn't dare look back as she gripped Lily's wrist and pulled her forward, sprinting down the cracked pavement of the abandoned street. The cold air burned in her lungs, but she didn't care. They needed distance. They needed to get away before a car engine roared to life. Elizabeth's stomach dropped. The black car. It was parked just a few houses down, its headlights flashing on, blinding in the dim evening light. Lily, go! They veered sharply to the left, cutting through a narrow alley between two houses. Elizabeth's heart pounded as she heard the screech of tires behind them, the car turning, following. She spotted an old wooden fence ahead, barely standing. Without hesitation, she grabbed Lily and lifted her over. Climb, sweetheart, climb. Lily scrambled over, panting, just as Elizabeth followed, swinging her legs over the top. The sound of a car door slamming shut sent a jolt of terror through her. They had seconds before whoever was inside would reach them. Elizabeth hit the ground and grabbed Lily's hand again, pulling her forward. They ran through the backyard, past an overturned trash can, through another alley, until finally, Elizabeth spotted the faint glow of a convenience store sign ahead. She didn't stop until they were inside. The bright fluorescent lights burned her eyes as she stumbled to the front counter, gasping for breath. The clerk, a young man barely out of his teens, looked up from his phone, eyes widening. Ma'am? Are you okay? Elizabeth barely got the words out. Call the police. Lily clung to her side, breathless, shaking. The clerk blinked. What's wrong? Elizabeth turned toward the glass storefront, her pulse racing, but the black car was gone, disappeared, as if it had never been there. She swallowed hard, trying to steady herself. Please, she said again. Call the police. The boy hesitated for only a moment before reaching for the phone. Elizabeth knelt beside Lily, brushing strands of hair from the girl's face. You okay, sweetheart? Lily nodded, but her hands were still trembling. Miss Carter? Who was that? Elizabeth swallowed, glancing back toward the window. She didn't know, but she was going to find out, one way or another. Elizabeth sat stiffly in the metal chair at the back of the small convenience store, her hands clenched tightly together as she watched the clock on the wall. Every tick of the second hand felt like a hammer against her already frayed nerves. Lily sat beside her, curled into herself, her fingers gripping the edges of her oversized hoodie like it was the only thing holding her together. The fluorescent lights above cast a harsh glow over the small space, making everything feel too bright, too exposed. The police were taking too long. The store clerk had called them almost 10 minutes ago, his voice uncertain as he relayed their location and the vague details Elizabeth had managed to give through her breathlessness. And yet, there was still no sign of them. Elizabeth's mind raced with possibilities. Whoever had followed them, whoever had broken into Lily's house, they knew she was involved now. They had been watching. They had waited until she got too close. And now they had made their presence known. She exhaled slowly, trying to keep her thoughts from spiraling. She needed to think clearly. Panicking wouldn't help either of them. Lily shifted beside her. Ms. Carter, she whispered. Her voice was so quiet Elizabeth almost didn't hear it. Elizabeth turned to her immediately. What is it, sweetheart? Lily hesitated, her blue eyes dark with worry. What if they find us here? Elizabeth reached out, placing a gentle hand over Lily's. They won't, she promised. Not while I'm here. But even as she said it, a shiver ran down her spine, because deep down, she wasn't sure if that was true. Before she could say anything else, The sound of approaching sirens finally broke through the stillness. The store clerk glanced toward the glass doors, relief flashing across his face as 2 squad cars pulled into the parking lot. Elizabeth let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. A moment later, 2 uniformed officers stepped inside, their expressions professional but wary. The taller of the 2, a man in his mid-40s with graying hair at his temples, approached first. His name tag read Officer Douglas. "Ms. Carter?" he asked, glancing between her and Lily. Elizabeth nodded. "Yes, thank you for coming." Douglas pulled out a small notebook. "The clerk said you needed police assistance. Can you tell me what happened?" Elizabeth straightened, choosing her words carefully. "We were followed," she said, "by a black car. It's been watching Lily's house for days. Tonight, someone broke into her home while we were inside." Douglas frowned. "Did you see who it was?" Elizabeth hesitated, exchanging a quick glance with Lily. "No, but I heard them. They spoke to us before we got away." "What did they say?" Elizabeth inhaled sharply, the words still fresh in her mind. "You shouldn't have come here." She repeated them aloud. Douglas's expression darkened. "And you're sure it wasn't just a burglar?" Elizabeth's jaw clenched. "No burglar breaks into a house that's already empty. They weren't looking for valuables. They were looking for us." Douglas sighed, jotting down notes before glancing at Lily. His expression softened slightly. "Sweetheart, do you know who might be following you?" Lily shook her head. "No," she whispered. Elizabeth could tell Douglas wasn't fully convinced, but he didn't press. Instead, he closed his notebook and turned back to her. "Do you have somewhere safe to stay tonight?" Elizabeth hesitated. She can stay with me," she said firmly, placing a hand on Lily's shoulder. Douglas studied her carefully. "Ms. Carter, I understand you want to protect her, but this is a delicate situation. If she's in danger, we need to involve Child Protective Services." Elizabeth's stomach twisted. Child Protective Services. She knew how that would go. Lily would be taken into the system, shuffled from place to place, and whatever answers they needed would be lost. If someone wanted her gone, that would be the easiest way to make it happen. Just make her disappear in the bureaucratic machine. "No," Elizabeth said quickly. "That's not an option. Lily has nowhere else to go. Let her stay with me, at least for tonight." Douglas hesitated. "Ms. Carter, please," Elizabeth interrupted. "I'll do whatever it takes. Just don't send her away." There was a long silence. Finally, Douglas sighed. "All right, but I need you to check in first thing tomorrow. And if anything else happens, you call us immediately." Elizabeth nodded. "I will. Thank you." Douglas gave her one last look before turning toward the exit. His partner followed, and within minutes the police were gone, leaving them alone again. Elizabeth turned back to Lily, who was still curled up in the chair. "Come on, sweetheart," she said gently. "Let's go home." The drive back to Elizabeth's house was quiet, the streetlights casting long shadows along the road. Lily stared out the window, lost in thought, her small hands tucked into the sleeves of her hoodie. Elizabeth stole a glance at her. "You okay?" Lily nodded, but it wasn't convincing. Elizabeth reached over, squeezing her hand briefly before focusing back on the road. By the time they reached her house, the exhaustion was weighing on both of them. Elizabeth led Lily inside, locking the doors behind them. "You can sleep in the guest room," she said, motioning down the hall. "I'll be right here if you need anything." Lily hesitated before nodding. "Okay." Elizabeth watched as the girl disappeared into the room, the door closing softly behind her. Only when she was alone did she allow herself to exhale. She leaned against the doorframe, rubbing her temples. What had she gotten herself into? She had started this simply wanting to help a student. Now, she was tangled in something much bigger than she had ever expected. She glanced toward the living room, where Lily's backpack sat on the couch. The documents. Elizabeth's stomach twisted. She needed to find out more about Margaret Whitmore. Grabbing her laptop, she settled onto the couch and began typing. Within seconds, articles flooded the screen. Margaret Whitmore, financial executive, missing for 6 years. The more Elizabeth read, the deeper the pit in her stomach grew. Margaret had disappeared shortly after uncovering financial discrepancies at a major investment firm, the same firm that had later been investigated for fraud and illegal dealings. The scandal had been huge. Millions of dollars unaccounted for. Employees arrested. Companies dissolved. But Margaret, she had vanished. And now her daughter was sitting in Elizabeth's guest room. Her mind raced with possibilities. Had Margaret been running from someone involved in that scandal? Had she known too much? And more importantly, was she still alive? A sudden knock at the front door made Elizabeth jump. Her heart pounded as she set the laptop aside, her breath catching in her throat. It was nearly midnight. No one should be knocking at her door. She moved carefully toward the entrance, her fingers hovering over the doorknob. Another knock, more urgent this time. "Lily?" she called softly. The girl's voice came from down the hall. "Yeah." Elizabeth took a deep breath. "Stay in your room." A long pause, then Lily's small whisper. "Ms. Carter, don't open it." Elizabeth's blood ran cold. She wasn't going to. She took a step back, peering through the peephole. A man stood outside. Not Lawson, not the police. Someone she didn't recognize. Dressed in black, expression unreadable. And then he slid a folded piece of paper under the door. Without a word, without a sound, he turned and walked away. Elizabeth didn't move. She waited, her breath tight in her chest, until the footsteps disappeared into the night. Only then did she bend down, her fingers trembling as she picked up the note. She unfolded it slowly, and when she saw the words scrawled across the page, her blood turned to ice. "Stop looking for answers, or you won't like what you find." Elizabeth stood frozen in the dim glow of the hallway, the piece of paper trembling in her grasp. The words on the note burned into her mind like a silent threat, each letter carrying the weight of an unspoken warning. "Stop looking for answers, or you won't like what you find." The message was clear. Someone wanted her to back off, to let it go, to pretend that none of this was happening. But she couldn't. She exhaled slowly, forcing herself to stay calm. She needed to think. She needed to stay in control. The fear curling in her chest threatened to take over, but she pushed it down. A creak from behind made her turn sharply. Lily stood in the hallway, her small frame barely illuminated by the faint light from the living room. She was hugging herself, her blue eyes wide with fear. "Ms. Carter," she whispered. "Who was at the door?" Elizabeth hesitated for only a moment before stepping forward, kneeling down so they were eye level. She couldn't tell Lily everything, not yet. The girl had already been through too much. "It was no one," she lied gently. "Just someone leaving a note." Lily's gaze flickered to the paper in Elizabeth's hands. "What does it say?" Elizabeth folded it before Lily could read it, forcing a small, reassuring smile. "Nothing important. Just something I need to take care of." Lily didn't look convinced, but she didn't press. Instead, she hesitated before whispering, "Are we safe here?" Elizabeth's chest tightened. "Yes," she said firmly, even though she wasn't sure if it was true. "We're safe." She reached out, brushing a strand of blonde hair behind Lily's ear. "Go back to bed, sweetheart. I promise, everything's going to be okay." Lily stared at her for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether or not to believe her. Then finally she nodded. "Okay," she murmured before turning and retreating to the guest room. Elizabeth watched the door close behind her, waiting until she heard the soft creak of the bed as Lily climbed in. Then, she unfolded the note again, staring at the words. "Stop looking for answers, or you won't like what you find." Her jaw tightened. If they thought this would scare her off, they were wrong. She grabbed her laptop from the couch, determination settling in her bones. She needed to dig deeper. She needed to find out what had happened to Margaret Whitmore, and more importantly, why someone was so desperate to keep it buried. The search results she had skimmed earlier barely scratched the surface. The articles about Margaret's disappearance were vague. filled with speculation but no real answers. She clicked on an old newspaper article from 6 years ago. Financial executive Margaret Whitmore reported missing amidst fraud allegations. The article detailed the scandal that had rocked the financial world. Whitmore had been an executive at a major investment firm, Everbrook Holdings. She had been a rising star, known for her sharp instincts and fearless decision-making. But then, out of nowhere, she had vanished. The article speculated on multiple theories. Some claimed she had stolen money and fled. Others believed she had uncovered something illegal and had been silenced. Elizabeth's stomach churned as she scrolled further. One particular paragraph caught her eye. Shortly before her disappearance, Whitmore allegedly reached out to an anonymous source claiming she had discovered discrepancies in the company's financial records. However, no formal complaint was ever filed, and her whereabouts remain unknown. Elizabeth's fingers hovered over the keyboard. If Margaret had discovered something dangerous, something she wasn't supposed to, it made sense why she had run. But that still didn't explain why Lily was being hunted. Unless Margaret had left behind more than just a trail of unanswered questions. Elizabeth's mind raced as she typed in a new search. Everbrook Holdings. A flood of results appeared, most of them old financial reports, some mentioning investigations into missing funds. But what stood out the most was a headline from just 6 months ago. Everbrook Holdings CEO found dead in apparent suicide. Elizabeth clicked on the article, her heart pounding. The CEO's name was David Lawson. Lawson. Her blood ran cold. She knew that name. Richard Lawson. The man who had come to her classroom. The one who claimed to work for child welfare. They were related. Elizabeth's hands clenched into fists. This wasn't a coincidence. Richard Lawson had lied about his identity. He wasn't from child services. He was connected to Everbrook Holdings. And if he was involved, that meant Everbrook wasn't done burying its secrets. A deep sense of dread settled in her stomach. She clicked back to the search bar and hesitated before typing something else. Margaret Whitmore last known location. A few scattered results appeared, speculation, old addresses, dead ends. But then she found something that made her breath catch. An old real estate listing. A foreclosed cabin. Listed under Margaret Whitmore's name. The date of foreclosure? 6 months ago. Elizabeth's mind raced. 6 months ago. The same time David Lawson, the Everbrook CEO, had died. This couldn't be a coincidence. Her gut told her. Margaret had been there. And if that was the case, maybe there was still something there. Something Everbrook hadn't found. Something they were still looking for. Her heart pounded as she scribbled down the address. She had to go there, but not alone. She turned toward the guest room, taking a deep breath before knocking softly. "Lily?" she called. A moment later, the door opened, and the girl peered up at her sleepily. "Ms. Carter." Elizabeth crouched down so they were eye level. "Sweetheart, I need to ask you something really important, and I need you to be completely honest with me." Lily blinked. "Okay, does the name Everbrook Holdings mean anything to you?" For a moment, Lily didn't react. Then her face paled. Elizabeth's stomach dropped. Lily knew. Elizabeth reached for her hands, gripping them gently. "Lily, sweetheart, please. What do you know?" Lily swallowed hard. I don't know much," she whispered. "But my mom used to say their names sometimes, when she thought I wasn't listening." Elizabeth nodded encouragingly. "Do you remember anything she said?" Lily hesitated, biting her lip. "Just one thing," she whispered. Elizabeth's breath hitched. "What is it?" Lily looked down at her hands, her voice barely above a whisper. She said, "If anything happens, the answers are in the cabin." Elizabeth's heart nearly stopped. The cabin, the one she had just found. It wasn't a coincidence. It was the key. Elizabeth took a slow, steady breath, her mind racing. "Lily," she said gently, "we need to go there." Lily looked up at her, fear flickering in her eyes. "Tonight." Elizabeth hesitated. It was dangerous, but waiting could be worse. She exhaled sharply. "Tomorrow morning," she decided. "First thing." Lily nodded slowly. Elizabeth squeezed her hands. "We're going to find the truth. And I promise, I won't let anything happen to you." But as she stood, glancing back at the folded note on the coffee table, a dark feeling settled in her chest. Whoever had been watching them, whoever had sent that warning, they weren't done yet. And if she and Lily weren't careful, they might not make it to the truth in time. Elizabeth barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, her mind spun with questions, theories, and worst-case scenarios. The note, the black car, Richard Lawson, Everbrook Holdings, it all connected, but the final piece of the puzzle was still missing. The cabin. That was the key. Margaret Whitmore had left it behind for a reason. She had told Lily that if anything happened, the answers were there, which meant someone else knew that, too. Elizabeth sat in the dim glow of her kitchen, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had long since gone cold. The silence in the house was heavy, pressing down on her. Every so often, she glanced toward the hallway, toward the guest room where Lily was sleeping. The girl had been through so much, too much, and now, Elizabeth was about to take her deeper into a mystery that had already stolen her family. But she didn't have a choice, because if they didn't get to that cabin first, someone else would. At the first sign of daylight, Elizabeth packed a bag with essentials: flashlights, water, extra clothes, and the stack of documents from Lily's backpack. She wasn't sure what they would find, but she needed to be prepared. By the time Lily woke up, Elizabeth was already lacing up her boots. The girl rubbed her eyes sleepily, then paused, frowning slightly. "You're really going, aren't you?" Elizabeth met her gaze. "Yes, and I want you to come with me." Lily hesitated, uncertainty flickering across her face. What if someone follows us?" Elizabeth softened her tone. "We'll be careful. Promise." "But Lily, this is our only chance to find out what happened to your parents. If we don't do this now, we may never know the truth." Lily bit her lip, then nodded slowly. "Okay." Elizabeth squeezed her hand. "Go get dressed. We leave in 10 minutes. The drive out of town was quiet, the hum of the car engine the only sound between them. Lily stared out the window, lost in thought. Elizabeth stole a few glances at her, wondering what was going through her mind. "You okay, sweetheart?" Lily nodded, but she didn't look away from the window. I keep thinking about my mom, about what she was so afraid of." Elizabeth exhaled, gripping the steering wheel tighter. "We're going to find out." They drove for miles, leaving behind the familiar streets of their small town and heading deeper into the countryside. The further they went, the fewer houses they saw. Soon, they were surrounded by dense woods, the road narrowing into a winding path of cracked asphalt. Elizabeth checked the GPS. The cabin wasn't far now. As they approached, the trees grew thicker, the sunlight filtering through the branches in broken patches. Finally, they turned onto a barely visible dirt road, overgrown with weeds and fallen leaves. The cabin sat at the end, hidden between towering pines, its wooden exterior weathered and worn from years of abandonment. Elizabeth parked the car and took a slow, steady breath. This was it. Lily shifted beside her, gripping the straps of her backpack. "It looks empty." Elizabeth nodded. "Let's take a look." They stepped out of the car, their footsteps crunching against the gravel. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood and pine, the only sounds the rustling leaves and the distant call of birds. Elizabeth approached the front door, testing the handle. It was unlocked. A flicker of unease passed through her. "Lily, stay close to me," she murmured before pushing the door open. The cabin was small, only a single story with a few rooms. Dust coated every surface, the air stale and undisturbed. A few pieces of old furniture remained: an overturned chair, a rusted stove, a faded couch with stuffing poking out of the seams. But something felt off. Elizabeth scanned the room, her instincts tingling. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no footprints in the dust. And yet, someone had been here. Lily moved cautiously beside her, her eyes darting around. "Do you think my mom really lived here?" Elizabeth wasn't sure how to answer. "Let's look around." They searched the cabin carefully, checking each room. Most were empty, stripped of anything useful. But then, in the farthest corner of the cabin, partially hidden beneath an old rug, Elizabeth found it. A small trapdoor. Her breath caught. "Lily," she called. The girl hurried over, eyes widening as she saw what Elizabeth had uncovered. Elizabeth knelt down, gripping the edge of the wooden panel. With a firm tug, she pulled it open. A dark, narrow space stretched below, a hidden compartment. And inside, a metal box. Elizabeth reached down, lifting it carefully. It was locked, but the latch was old and rusted. With one hard push, it popped open. Inside were papers. More documents, but these weren't just financial statements. These were letters. Elizabeth's hands shook as she picked up the first one. The handwriting was familiar, the ink slightly smudged. It was from Margaret Whitmore. She glanced at Lily, who was staring at the papers with wide, unblinking eyes. Elizabeth took a deep breath and began to read aloud. "If you're reading this, it means something has happened. It means I couldn't run fast enough. I couldn't keep Lily safe." Elizabeth's throat tightened. She continued, "They found me. They always do. I've spent years looking over my shoulder, waiting for the moment they catch up. I thought I had more time. I was wrong." A chill ran through Elizabeth's veins. "Lily, sweetheart, if you ever see this, I'm so sorry. I wanted to tell you the truth, but I was too afraid. I thought if I kept you in the dark, you'd be safe. But I see now that was a mistake. Everbrook Holdings is not just a company. It's a machine. A machine built on lies, on stolen lives. I found proof of what they've done, what they've been hiding. And now they want me gone." Elizabeth's hands clenched around the paper. "The answers are here, hidden in this box. The names, the accounts, the proof of everything they've covered up. It's all here. And that's why they're coming for me." She turned to the next page. But before she could continue, a sound outside. Car engine. Elizabeth's breath hitched. She exchanged a glance with Lily, who had gone completely still. Someone was here. Someone had followed them. Elizabeth grabbed the box, shoving it into her bag. "Lily, we have to go. Now." She reached for the trapdoor, closing it as quietly as she could. Footsteps crunched outside. Elizabeth's heart pounded. She grabbed Lily's hand, leading her toward the back exit of the cabin. But just as they reached the door, the front door slammed open. Elizabeth spun around, pulling Lily behind her. And standing in the doorway, his eyes cold and unreadable, Richard Lawson. His gaze flickered to the open trapdoor, then to Elizabeth's bag. His expression remained calm, but there was something dark behind his eyes. "You should have stayed out of this, Miss Carter," he said quietly. Elizabeth tightened her grip on Lily. "You don't want to do this," she said, forcing her voice to stay steady. Lawson took a slow step forward. "I'm afraid I don't have a choice." Elizabeth's stomach twisted. They had to get out of there. They had what they needed. But the real question was, would they make it out alive? Elizabeth's pulse pounded in her ears as Richard Lawson took another slow step forward, his polished shoes crunching against the old wooden floor of the cabin. His presence filled the room like a storm cloud rolling in, suffocating, heavy with unspoken threats. Lily's small hand trembled in Elizabeth's grasp, but she held on tight, her fingers wrapped protectively around the girl's. There was no mistaking the look in Lawson's eyes, cold, calculating, a man who was used to control. "You found it, didn't you?" Lawson's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, a quiet warning beneath the surface. Elizabeth swallowed hard, standing her ground. "I don't know what you're talking about." Lawson let out a slow, almost amused exhale. "Come on, Ms. Carter. Let's not play games. I know you found what Margaret left behind." His gaze flickered to the bag slung over Elizabeth's shoulder. "And now you're going to give it to me." Elizabeth tightened her grip on the strap of her bag. "No." Lawson's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted. Just slightly, just enough for Elizabeth to know she had made a dangerous move. "Ms. Carter," he said, his tone almost patronizing now. You don't understand what you've gotten yourself into. You think you're helping, but you're not. You're only making things worse. For yourself and for Lily. Elizabeth felt Lily's grip tighten around her hand. She could feel the girl trembling, her entire body tense with fear. You don't get to decide what's best for her, Elizabeth said, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. Her mother trusted that one day she would find the truth, and I'm going to make sure she does. Lawson sighed, shaking his head. And what do you think you're going to do, Miss Carter? Take down an entire corporation with a handful of papers? Do you really think Everbrook Holdings hasn't spent years covering its tracks? Elizabeth's heart pounded. She knew he was right. This wasn't just about uncovering corruption. Everbrook had power, influence, and if they had been willing to hunt down Margaret Whitmore for 6 years, they wouldn't hesitate to do the same to anyone who got in their way. Lawson took another step forward. Hand over the documents, and I promise you both can walk out of here. Safe. No more threats, no more looking over your shoulder. Just go back to your normal life. Elizabeth clenched her jaw. And what happens to Lily? Lawson tilted his head slightly. She'll be taken care of. Elizabeth's stomach twisted. She could hear the unspoken meaning behind his words. She'll disappear. Her grip on Lily's hand tightened. No, she wasn't going to let that happen. Elizabeth took a slow step backward, pulling Lily with her. We're leaving. Lawson's jaw flexed. Ms. Carter. Elizabeth didn't wait for him to finish. In a single, fluid motion, she grabbed a nearby chair and shoved it into his path, sending it crashing to the floor as she spun toward the back door. Run! Lily bolted ahead, her small frame slipping through the doorway as Elizabeth sprinted after her. The cabin's back exit led straight into the dense forest, the towering trees stretching endlessly in every direction. The ground was uneven, covered in damp leaves and tangled roots. Behind them, Elizabeth heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps pounding after them. Lawson was following. Her lungs burned as she pushed forward, dodging low-hanging branches, forcing her legs to move faster. Lily was just ahead, her breath ragged, her feet barely making a sound as she navigated the forest with the precision of someone who had learned how to survive on instinct alone. Elizabeth could hear Lawson getting closer. He was faster. Panic surged through her, but she shoved it down, focusing only on keeping Lily safe. Then, a split second of hesitation. Lily tripped. Elizabeth lunged forward, catching her just in time, but the momentary delay was enough. Lawson was right behind them now. Elizabeth spun around just as he reached them, his expression unreadable. You don't have to do this, he said, his breath even, controlled. I told you, I don't want to hurt anyone. Just give me the documents. Elizabeth held Lily behind her, her pulse racing. And what happens after that? She demanded. What happens to Lily? To me? Lawson exhaled sharply, as if disappointed. You weren't supposed to get involved. But I did, Elizabeth shot back. And I'm not backing down. A flicker of something passed through Lawson's eyes. Annoyance, frustration, but then something else. Resignation. For the first time since she had met him, he hesitated. And that was all Elizabeth needed. She grabbed a handful of dirt from the forest floor and threw it into his face. Lawson recoiled, coughing, momentarily blinded, and Elizabeth ran. She yanked Lily forward, pushing her ahead. Keep going, don't stop. The girl didn't hesitate this time. They ran, faster than ever. Elizabeth didn't know how long they ran, how far they went. She didn't stop until the trees began to thin, until she saw the faint shimmer of a distant road. They had made it out of the forest. Lily collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath, her small frame shaking. Elizabeth knelt beside her, brushing her damp hair back. You okay, sweetheart? Lily nodded, though her entire body trembled. What do we do now? Elizabeth exhaled, looking down at the bag slung over her shoulder. The documents were still inside. The truth was still with them. She had one last card to play. We go public, she said, We tell the world what Everbrook did. Lily's eyes widened. But won't they stop us? Elizabeth's jaw clenched. Not if we move fast enough. She pulled out her phone, her fingers shaking as she typed in a contact. A journalist she had met years ago. Someone she knew she could trust. She hit call. A few rings. Then, Elizabeth. The voice on the other end was surprised. It's been a long time. Elizabeth took a deep breath. I have a story for you, she said, and it's going to change everything. A pause. Then, a quiet reply. I'm listening. Elizabeth closed her eyes for just a second, feeling the weight of everything settle around her. This wasn't over. Not yet. But for the first time, they had a chance. Elizabeth's fingers gripped the phone so tightly that her knuckles turned white. The voice on the other end, familiar yet distant, held a weight she hadn't realized she needed. Someone who could finally listen. Someone who might be able to expose the truth before it was too late. Elizabeth, the journalist repeated, his tone shifting from surprise to curiosity. What kind of story are we talking about? Elizabeth glanced at Lily, who sat on the ground beside her, her small frame trembling from exhaustion and fear. The girl looked up at her with wide, uncertain eyes, waiting for an answer. Elizabeth swallowed hard. A cover-up, she said. A powerful corporation. A missing woman. A child who's been running for 6 years without even knowing why. A pause. Then, where are you? Elizabeth exhaled. Somewhere safe. For now. But I don't know how long that will last. The journalist hesitated, then spoke in a quieter, more urgent tone. You're in trouble, aren't you? Yes. A breath on the other end. Then, meet me in 3 hours. The old train station downtown. Platform 6. I'll be there. Elizabeth hesitated. Could be a trap. Could be another mistake. But what other option did she have? I'll be there, she said, then ended the call. She turned to Lily, brushing damp strands of hair from the girl's face. We have a chance, sweetheart. We just need to get downtown. Lily's eyes were still full of fear. What if he finds us first? Elizabeth squeezed her hand. Then we don't give him the chance. She pulled Lily to her feet, slung the bag over her shoulder, and led her toward the road. They had no car, no safe place left to go, but they had one last shot. The sun had begun to rise higher in the sky by the time they reached the outskirts of the city. They kept off the main roads, cutting through alleys and side streets, staying out of sight. Elizabeth checked over her shoulder every few minutes, half expecting to see a black car following them. But for now, they were alone. By the time they reached the abandoned train station, Elizabeth's nerves were frayed. The building was old, long since closed, the tracks rusted and covered in overgrown weeds. The platform was empty except for a few scattered birds, pecking at the concrete. She tightened her grip on Lily's hand. Stay close. They moved toward platform 6, scanning the area. Then, a figure stepped out from the shadows. Elizabeth's breath caught. For a split second, panic surged through her. Richard Lawson. But then the man turned, and she let out a slow breath of relief. It was the journalist, Daniel Hart. Tall, slightly disheveled, dressed in a worn leather jacket and jeans. Daniel looked exactly the same as he had 10 years ago when she'd first met him. His sharp eyes studied her carefully, flickering to Lily, then back to Elizabeth. Jesus, Elizabeth, he murmured. You look like hell. Elizabeth let out a dry, humorless laugh. I feel worse. Daniel's expression turned serious. Tell me everything. Elizabeth didn't waste time. She pulled out the documents, handing them over as she quickly explained everything. Margaret Whitmore, Everbrook Holdings, the financial scandal, Richard Lawson, the threats, the black car. Daniel flipped through the pages, his expression hardening. This is huge, he muttered. This isn't just fraud. This is a multi-billion-dollar cover-up. If this gets out, they'll do anything to stop it. Elizabeth finished for him. Daniel exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. You realize what this means, don't you? If we go public with this, Everbrook Holdings is finished. But so are you. Elizabeth's jaw tightened. I don't care. Daniel studied her carefully. And the kid? Elizabeth looked at Lily, who was watching them both with wary eyes. She deserves to know the truth, Elizabeth said. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then finally he nodded. I can get this published. But it's not going to be easy. People like Lawson don't just let things like this slip through the cracks. Once I release this, you need to be prepared for what comes next. Elizabeth swallowed hard. I know. Daniel glanced at Lily. What about her? She's still a kid. Where is she going to go? Elizabeth hesitated. Lily spoke before she could. With Ms. Carter, she said quietly. Elizabeth's throat tightened. Daniel exhaled. Then we don't have time to waste. He pulled out his phone, snapping pictures of the documents. I'll get this to my editor. We'll run the story as fast as we can. Elizabeth nodded. But before she could respond, a sharp noise split the air. A car door. Elizabeth's blood ran cold. She turned sharply and saw Richard Lawson standing at the edge of the platform. He wasn't alone. 2 other men stood behind him, dressed in dark suits. Lawson's expression was unreadable, but his eyes burned with something dangerous. You should have listened, Miss Carter, he said. I gave you a chance. Elizabeth took a step back, instinctively pulling Lily behind her. We're not going with you. Lawson sighed. I figured you'd say that. He lifted his hand, a signal. The 2 men stepped forward. Daniel moved in front of Elizabeth and Lily. You really want to do this, Lawson? Right here? In broad daylight. Lawson's jaw clenched. You don't understand what you're playing with, Hart. Daniel smirked. I think I understand just fine. Before Lawson could respond, the sound of sirens filled the air. Elizabeth's breath caught. Police cars. Lawson's expression darkened. Looks like you ran out of time, Daniel said coolly. Lawson's fists clenched at his sides. He stared at Elizabeth for a long moment, his dark eyes unreadable. Then, without another word, he turned on his heel and walked away. His men followed. Elizabeth didn't breathe until the black car disappeared down the road. She turned to Daniel, her heart pounding. You called them? Daniel smirked. What kind of journalist would I be if I didn't have a backup plan? Elizabeth let out a shaky laugh, relief flooding through her. Lily clung to her side, her small fingers digging into her sleeve. Is it over? She whispered. Elizabeth looked down at her. At the girl who had survived so much, who had been running for years without even knowing why. She knelt down, brushing a strand of hair from Lily's face. Yes, sweetheart, she whispered. It's over. For the first time in weeks, she felt the weight on her chest begin to lift. The story was out. The truth was finally free. And so was Lily.